begin, I wanted to take a quick poll and simply ask how many of you are already familiar with Gagnes' research into conditions for learning and his 9 events of instruction. So just click on the green check mark if you're familiar with or have at least heard of the 9 events of instruction, and an X if this is completely new to you. Okay, and you'll see the little green check mark and the red X and the little box above where you see the it's in the main room area. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. Looks like this is probably new to most of you. So let's go ahead and begin. And I'm going to take you through, I'm going to sort of simulate the 9 events and how you would plug them into your lesson plan as I also explain what they are and how you can actualize them in your own teaching. All right, so on this slide we see a graphic organizer that features a plot line or story diagram. I've pasted this diagram on the slide to ask you an attention-getting question. And event number 1 of Gagnes' 9 events is to gain students' attention. So hopefully you all see this diagram on your screen. I want to ask you the question, what do you think a story diagram or a plot line has in common with teaching instruction? And if you could just please type your response in the comment box here in Blackboard Collaborate. So what do you think a story diagram has in common with teaching and instruction? Okay, and while you all are typing in, I'm going to keep things moving along here. Would you characterize your instructional practice as having a predictable sequence or pattern of instruction? In other words, do you use a predictable framework for structuring and sequencing your classroom instruction, or if you're teaching online, your online instruction? And if you could please this time respond with a green check mark for yes and a red X for no. So how do you characterize, or would you characterize your instructional practice as having a predictable sequence or pattern of instruction, much like a story diagram template? Okay, great. Well, you just helped me demonstrate the first event in the 9 events of instruction, which is getting students' attention. And we'll talk a little bit more about the particulars of that in just a minute. Briefly, I just want to post the objectives for today's 10-minute teaching tip. So we want to do 3 things today. We want to introduce the 9 events of instruction. We want to review and analyze examples of each of the 9 events of instruction. And we want to end with a brief reflection and wrap-up Q&A type session. So let's move on. So as I mentioned, the first event, or event number 1 of the 9 events, is to gain students' attention. This is a critical first step in planning and delivering instruction, because if you don't gain your students' attention, kind of, if you will, the moment the bell rings, you're really going to be struggling to maintain their attention and enhance their engagement for the rest of the class. So this really needs to happen at the very beginning of class. You need to get the students' attention. You're always in competition with your students for their attention. Trying to get their attention away from their digital devices, from each other, from whatever's on their minds. So again, it's a critical first step in order to captivate and engage your students from the get-go. So going back to that previous slide where I had the plot diagram, how did I gain your attention at the beginning of this presentation? Maybe a couple of you could just respond orally to that question. What did I do to gain your attention? Okay, I asked a question, right. A thought-provoking question, exactly. So those are just some scenarios. And I've got some other examples posted on the slide. You could tell a short story, a little anecdotal narrative. You could show a brief video. painting an image. You might give your students a case-based scenario, play a music, a song, quotation, any sort of icebreaker activity. These are all great ways of getting students' attention and getting them engaged in the content of that day's lesson. All right, let's move on to event number 2. The event number 2 is to inform your learners of the objectives for that particular lesson, or if you're teaching online, it might be for that week's learning module or learning unit. And I think so often we forget to do this. We don't tell the students what our goals are for that day. So you want to cue your students to organize their thoughts for what they are about to see, hear, do, etc. So some examples, you can state and post objectives on a whiteboard, put them in a syllabus, you can put them on instructions for activities, projects, papers, etc. But students need to know why they're there, what they're going to do and accomplish in a given day or a given unit of learning. All right, event number 3 is all about stimulating recall of prior learning. So at the beginning of each class or lesson, you want to build a bridge from the previous class or lesson by asking students to recall or recap content, events, concepts, activities, etc. from the previous class. I call this transfer in, and I actually put it on my lesson plan that way as they transfer in. So a simple thing you can do is just make a statement at the beginning of class. Last week we discussed the present perfect tense. This week we will look at, the past perfect tense. So it could be something just that quick and simple and easy. You could also give polls or surveys eliciting opinions, or simply ask students for their opinions on a topic. You could ask questions to gauge students' familiarity with a new topic. Sometimes I'll even have a student recap the previous class for me. And they'll just stand up and say, well, last class we talked about blah, 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 and we did this activity. And you'd be surprised, even if you're teaching, say, a Tuesday, Thursday class, what students don't remember from the previous lesson. You really have to jog their memories. All right, event number 4 is simply to present the content of the lesson. And in doing this, this is where you want to vary your instructional methods or practices to present the content of a particular class or lesson. Again, this could be online or face-to-face. Some examples are readings, multimedia, projects, lecture, wikis, blogs, YouTube, podcasts. I'm sure most of you are varying how you present content in your courses, but I think the important thing is to vary it in order to keep students engaged. Kind of keep them guessing about how they're going to engage with content. All right, event number 5 is to provide learning guidance or guided learning activities. And the idea here is to give students some guidance or tips on how to learn new content or new skills or tasks or materials. So not simply presenting the material, but going a step beyond that and setting them up for success. Some of the ways you could do that are through demonstration, modeling, simulation. The students need to learn how to learn in addition to learning. So we sort of, we have a challenge as teachers, not simply to disseminate information, but also to train students how to master that content. What behaviors or practices can they employ so that they'll be successful in learning new content. So this is sort of guided practice, if you will, and giving students, setting them up for success for learning. And I've given you some examples here. All right. Event number 6 is for eliciting performance. So this is application and practice. You want to encourage and allow your students to apply and practice what they've just learned. So these would be sort of low stakes assignments and activities. This might be part of a participation grade as opposed to a quiz grade or a test grade. So these are activities where students are actually mastering the behaviors and the skills and tasks that they need to do to be successful and to learn the content. So examples here might be small group activities, debates, lab assignments or activities, team competitions, panel discussions, jigsaw activities, etc. The idea is that students now are applying what they've learned. Event number 7 is where you as the instructor can provide feedback to your students on those practice activities or low-stakes assignments that they've been doing. You want to be engaged with your students as they learn and complete assignments and activities. Again, the idea is to set them up for success on the bigger, higher stakes projects, assessments, and assignments in your class. So some examples here could just simply be providing feedback and comments during student small group discussions to redirect or correct misunderstandings, to demonstrate the correct method for completing a task or activity, etc. Event number 9, this is more, could be both low stakes or high stakes type assessments. You might, start with low stakes and build up to more higher stakes assessments, but obviously you need to assess performance. So how are students mastering the content? Have they mastered it? Do they need to be, any sort of reteaching or in order to master content? How are they doing? So you want to vary the type and methods of assessment you use in your instructions. Each individual lesson taught, you can ask yourself, okay, how will you know if your students have mastered or fulfilled the learning objectives for that particular lesson? And some people will even talk about backwards planning. That is, you're planning a unit or a lesson. You might actually start here with your thinking of how will you know when students have mastered it, and then go back and build the lesson from where you know it's going, how things are going to end. So just remember that assessment is both formative and summative, and you want to incorporate a variety of assessments, both low and high stakes type assessments, both formative and summative. So some examples would be quizzes and exams, written assignments, projects, etc. And you want to be sure and provide rubrics for projects and written assignments, because again, you want your students to know what a successful project or assignment will look like. What are the pieces that go into that? And finally, here I've got some links here I'm going to send you on formative and summative assessment, and you'll have those in some files that I've transferred to you, and I can transfer them again if you don't receive them. The final event, event 9, is about enhancing retention. So you want to provide an opportunity for closure at the end of a lesson. So what I think of as reflection and wrap-up. So often we let the clock end our classes, or just simply the calendar, we've run out of time, and we don't leave time to have students reflect and wrap up what they're learning and really think about it, kind of go more into that metacognitive state of mind. So you want to provide opportunities to reflect on new learning, ask what I call closure questions at the end of each lesson, and you want to build a bridge from that lesson to the next lesson. So some examples would be simple questions at the end of a class, discussions or discussion boards, questioning strategies to stimulate students to relate new learning to personal experiences. If you're teaching literature, for example, students can make text-to-self connections. And you want to preview the focus and the topic of the next lesson. That's what I call transfer out. So you might just give students a preview of what's coming next or what's coming down the pipeline. I've also provided a link for you here on 40 ways to leave a lesson that has just a multitude of great strategies for how to end a lesson with that critical piece for reflection and wrap up. All right, I know we've gone really fast through all of these. I want to give you an example lesson plan, and I've sent it to you as a transfer file. Did most of you see that file that I transferred to you? If not, I can go ahead and I'm going to resend it just to make sure that everyone got it. But I'm going to send you a sample lesson plan using Gagnes 9 events. So I've resent it just in case you didn't get it. And I've also sent you a blank template that you could use to build a lesson using these 9 events of instruction. And I'm going to resend that one just to make sure that everyone got it. Great. Okay. So as I mentioned, in simulating these 9 events of instruction, we want to end ourselves with reflection and wrap up and questions. So I have a few questions here. And I'd love to hear your response to any of these questions. So what are you excited about, having learned about the 9 events of instruction? What's something you'd like to learn more about, and what is something you still have a question about? And I'll open the floor now to any of you who would like to respond to any of those questions. And I guess, I don't know if you hit down the talk button to talk. What's the best way for people to ask a question, Tracy?
Either everyone can, whoever wants to talk can just press talk or type it like I just did. Whatever's easier. Some people are kind of shy about talking over the computer.
Okay, I see Erin posted that she'd like to learn more about ways to start her classes so that students come in on time and they're ready to work. And I think using the gain attention method is really good, the event number 1 at the beginning of class. And I've actually often turn that into a competitive thing. I'll have students, everyone stand up, and I'll ask questions related to the previous lesson, and students can't sit down until they answer something correctly. That seems to, my students are just, anything competitive seems to get them going, so that's a good way. Any other responses to these questions? Okay, Brooke mentioned that she feels like she always feels rushed and she doesn't end well. And Brooke, I struggle with that too. I think we all do. And even if you can just leave 3 minutes at the end of the class, or simply just say, hey, look, no, don't let them leave until they've done some sort of reflection, wrap up, and you've just at least made a statement about next class we're going to, or next week we're going to, or in the next learning module we're going to. Give them a pathway to what's coming next. Any other questions or comments?
Okay, Jesse. I think we've covered the questions. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. This session has been recorded, and I hope you got the files that Jesse sent over. And I will send this archive out to other people who maybe who registered and didn't attend, or whoever couldn't attend anyway. But thank you all for your time. Have a great day, and we'll see you maybe tomorrow for the next 10-minute teaching tip. Thanks so much.
Thank you, and I'm sending a copy of the PowerPoint right now.
Thank you,
so you all
Jesse,
should have that
very much.
Well.
I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for attending.
This was good. Thanks.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you.